But let's go around the room to start with, because I don't know everybody. So let's see. I should. This is like, okay, I'm Bart Jones, and I sort of organize this place. We are in Bill's environment. Let's go around. Can I see it? Yes, I can see it.
I'm Dave Hunchy, and I'm visiting because I went to the Tuesday group and I was struck by your presence and the way you talked about your venture into science and other areas.
Thank you. Hudson.
I'm Hudson Kingston, and I did miss the Tuesday group, but I'm excited for this.
Jody.
I'm Jody Chaffin. I'm with the Ely Climate Group, and I zoomed the Tuesday group and very much enjoyed that. Glad to be here now.
I'm Maggie. And I actually both work for Cure, so we've been hearing about you for for quite a while, or a lot. So yeah, sorry we couldn't make Tuesday group. We're really excited you're doing this as well.
Josh.
Hi everyone, I'm Josh Lambert. I just moved to town and heard about this at the Tuesday group and decided to swing on by.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Jim Burke. I live in Ely and I'm interested in climate change.
All right.
I'm Mary Louise Eisenhower, live in Ely, member of this group and our little working group, and interested in everything climate related.
I'm Doug Landy. I'm from Isabella, and I like coming to Ely, and I've been with the group year and a half. Yep.
I'm Brian Dowling, I live up north of town on the Echo Hill. I missed the Tuesday group, and I'm not sure why. That was, and I've been interested in climate for a long time. A really long time, actually.
I'm Bill Teft, and I live in Ely and have for a long time. Taught at the college and worked as a naturalist. Always interested in environmental things, and so we created the Ely Field Naturalist group in town, and then I'm also part of the climate change group and green team group that's working on environmental things in town.
I'm Katie Clark. I'm the Ely editor of the Timber Jay, which is one of the local newspapers. Oh, and I live in Ely.
One of the few independent papers left.
Yes.
We have Anna, who's our speaker. We'll get to you later,
yeah.
I guess. And
Well, I'm the last one to come in.
yeah.
I was walking, I let my dog out, so I'm Jack Fisher. I live in town. I came to the climate group, I don't know, a while ago when it was at the senior center. I was like, haven't been for a while, happy to be here.
And we have online, we have Renee.
Yes, I'm Renee Hansen. You may know my brother, Jeff Hansen. My family home is on Birch Lake, and when I'm in Minnesota, I try to come to the climate group. And Anna is my writing buddy, and so I had to be here because when two groups, a group and a person that I'm connected both to, were both here, I had to show up.
And Elton just walked in, so we'll say this is Elton who just came. Anna, let's pass it over to you.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming, and thank you, Renee. I didn't know you'd be here, and it's a really wonderful treat to have you here too. And so I'm Anna Farro Henderson. I wrote the book Core Samples. It came out in late October, and I have been on a book tour with it. And I've been doing a range of different kinds of events. I've been traveling to different parts of the country, and I have a Minnesota State Art Board grant, so supported by the Clean Water Land and Legacy Amendment, supported by the taxpayers of Minnesota, to do book events in rural communities that don't necessarily have a bookstore. And the goal of those events is to bring access to the arts and creative experiences to folks. And so it's been a real treasure to me that I get to do that, and that I have some support to do that. And so I have a few different creative activities. If you came earlier today, we did some community bookmaking And I was thinking that maybe today we could start here with a different activity, and I think it'll be one that Renee can do through the virtual world also. And I just kind of wanted to say that this thing of doing creative activities and doing the creative activities that I have are things where you do something on your own, but you're putting it together into a project that like we're all contributing to. And that when I think about climate change and what we need to do to address climate change, it always comes back to community, to collaboration, to coalition building, to working with other people. It isn't a thing that can be solved individually, but it's something that it takes us understanding other people. It takes us working with people who don't agree with us and finding where is the one place we can take that step together. Where is that one place where we can find an alliance, and being able to do art projects together might, I mean, hopefully it feels playful and fun, or you surprise yourself and you feel excited. But I think there's something deeper and deeply serious about that also, that being able to make art together might bring us a step closer to feeling connected to each other, or to having a different way of seeing the world, or seeing the world through each other's eyes. And because some of you were there earlier, I wanted to bring this, and I thought maybe I would just pass it around and people can peruse it while we're here. But this is the community nature book, and it has 2 sets of pages, and some of the pages at the back are blank. If you weren't there this morning, you're welcome to do a book plate. So this has book plate stickers. Book plates are a way to denote ownership of a book. Ex libris means something along the lines of this book belongs to. And so each of these book plates is a way for everybody who's contributing to say, like, I'm part of this book too. And the invitation for the book plates is to write a 7-word story about your relationship to nature. So we did that earlier at Tuesday group. If you weren't there, you're welcome to participate, but also I just wanted to bring this and pass it around and have people be able to see what other people have done. But the activity I wanted to start with today with all of you is, this is the hope jar. And there is a little sheet of paper with questions on it that I'll pass out. And it's an exercise on hope. And hope seems like kind of a simple concept, but I found that when people are talking about hope, particularly in connection to climate, to natural resources, to the environment, really quickly, I'm just going to pass these. And if you need pens, I have pens that I can just pass around. Just take one and pass them around. Yeah, that when people talk about hope, they actually often tend to just go to despair. It's like, here are all the things I hope don't happen.
Especially these days.
Here's all the stuff I'm terrified of. Here's all the things I'm angry about. And so the reason why, like, a question about, like, what, like, about your hopes has so much writing on it. And so, Renee, I'm going to hold this up for you as I talk about it. But the first question is to reflect on what currently gives you a sense of safety and or belonging. And so to just start by reflecting on where you find safety and where you find belonging in your life right now.
Could you pass the pens?
They're working their way.
Oh.
Pens have been in a very cold car. So. Getting warmed up. So the first question is that where you currently find safety, sense of belonging. And the next question is then getting to, like, what do you hope for? And what do you hope for in 5 years? So in the near term. And then what do you hope for in the next 25 years? So thinking further out. And then what do you hope for? And some of them, the printer, it's a little bit cut off, but it's 150 years. So going out beyond when any of us will be here. And so, yeah. What does it mean to think about the future beyond us and maybe beyond our kids?
Are we limited to 7 words?
No. You can have as many words as you want, but it is a small piece of paper.
And you said there was 150 years?
Yeah, that's the bottom one. On some of them it got cut off, so it looks like it's just 50, but it's 150, so.
Oh, now we're gonna be.
So are we supposed to, admit who wrote these?
Oh, you can put your name on there if you want, or you can put the location. So you don't have to, but the idea is to put it in the jar with all the other pieces of paper that people have written on and other places that I've gone to. And so it's kind of fun if you put the place where you are, because then, when these get read, they're just like all mixed up together.
Place we are now?
Mhm.
Okay.
Or you can put any identifying information you would like on there.
Ely Min, Feb 2024.
2025.
That is
I
correct.
keep messing up when I reset my computer time and date when the battery dies.
I have done that before.
Yeah.
I'm not ready for 2025.
Yeah.
Barb, we're a month and a half in.
Yeah.
Wait till next year, I'll get it right by then.
Okay, okay. Next year in February, I'll tell you to finally get out of 2025.
And so, you can have more time to be kind of like adding to this and writing about it as we go, or we could talk about this and we could talk about it in a little while, or we could talk about it right now.
I guess I'll seize a little bit of time here and
Yeah.
say that Anna talked from 12 to 1 at Tuesday group. And then she's been at folk school leading class. And then she's here. And so I'm just amazed that you're still upright and functioning, and you're going to be so pooped by the time this is all over. Is this your standard schedule?
I've been doing different things in different places.
Mm-hmm.
So,
It
yeah,
seems like a heavy lift.
it's nice to do
3 in a row.
multiple events in a place so that, you're seeing the community from like different angles and interacting with people in different ways. So that's really nice. I'm feeling pretty good. I was prepared and I have a jar of chocolate chips and nuts. So. And the beauty of doing, so the zine workshop that I was just teaching, we were celebrating winter in making like little handmade books. And a large part of the class, we were just silently creating, which is kind of I don't know, like how many people here do creative things, but it's beautiful to do creative things by yourself, but doing creative things in the same place as other people. We weren't talking, we didn't know what we were working on, but that they're working on them is kind of it's a really nourishing thing to do that I just encourage you to, sit in silence.
And now I'm sitting next to you. I can see you have a very interesting necklace. Maybe a geologist appreciates. Do you want to tell us about that?
Oh,
Is
it's
it
just
something special.
My son Walter, who's 15, when he was like, I don't know, maybe 9, I took him to California to visit my sister, and we were walking around San Francisco and people were selling things on the street. And he said, "Mom, will you buy that necklace for me, but you wear it?" Well, I could buy the necklace for you to wear. And he was like, "No, I want you to wear it." I was like, "Okay."
Oh, nice.
And I don't think he remembers that, but I like the necklace. No, so it's sort of a gift from Walter, I guess. But yeah, I'd be curious to hear kind of like if you learned anything about yourself in writing about hope, or what it brought your mind towards, and whether thinking about hope is making you feel hopeful or afraid.
Well, I can say the first difficulty I had was deciding what my hope would support.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So I mean, we could hope for the human race to, I could just focus on that over that time, or life forms in general, or I don't know what to hope for exactly for changes in the earth. That's going to be beyond, it's gonna take its own course. Other than that, I guess I hope that we don't do it in, but. But anyway, that was my difficulty, is figuring out where to direct my hope.
Yeah,
We won't do the earth and we might do ourselves.
Right.
Yeah, the big rock will keep spinning.
Well, we might do other things in too.
Right.
We have.
did anybody have like a sense of hopefulness about things?
I definitely, yeah, did a sense of hope when focusing on hope, and found that mostly being rooted in, yeah, a sense of community and like friendship and relying on one another to reach those goals.
Yeah. Yeah,
I guess my answer to the first one, what gives you a sense of safety and belonging? And I said, being right here. Because all these people have similar concerns, and being with people who have similar concerns is half the battle.
yeah,
Yeah, I vote the same thing. My community. Yes, that's my safety and belonging.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a good community.
I think that's what I had, something similar to the first one, it's friends and I hoped for optimism. Those things maintain itself. So,
yeah.
Hope is a good thing.
Hope is a good thing, and I think hope is something that we can cultivate and we can lean into. And certainly, I guess like for me, you know, going out and talking to people about my book makes me feel hopeful because I'm meeting people who are interested and concerned, who are engaged. Even just, you know, what I was doing before I came here at the folk school where we were making zines, and the act of creating and people being excited, like there's a it felt like we were sourcing a well of energy, you know, and being able to find those ways to do that is really um deeply meaningful.
So is this really the motivation for writing the book?
The motivation for writing the book is that I'm a writer. So, I mean, I just like I write, so it's like nice to share your writing and to have an audience, and to take the writing just from like the personal to a broader world. Um, yeah, and so some of you weren't at the talk this morning, so I might just talk about the book a little bit if that's okay. And those of you who were there, if you have a particular thing you want to hear more about, or you know, I might read from the book a little bit if that's fun. You can like if you already know something, you can use that to like point us in a direction if you like. But so core samples, the title of this refers to the types of scientific samples that I studied as a researcher. I was a research scientist. I'm a geologist by training. My primary archive that I was studying, that I was taking core samples of, was lake sediments. It's a really good time of year right now to be coring lakes. Best times to go out on a frozen lake, auger a hole. You're able to like know exactly where you are in relation to the hole that you're taking sediments from. And basically lakes are a hole in the landscape that things fall into, and they're preserved under the water. And so you get a really nice time series of what was on the landscape and what was falling in the water, and what might seem kind of like trash in the moment. Like if you have a ring of pollen around a lake, you know, it just sort of seems like not very interesting, but 10,000 years later, someone's extracting that pollen from the sediment and it's providing a snapshot of the plants that were on the landscape at this time. Core samples also has a literary meaning and refers to the personal nature of the writing. So these are personal essays. I wrote the book very much thinking about being in scene as much as possible. My hope for writing the book was to present science and politics and environmental policy and politics in a different way than I had read about it. So to make it as human as possible, as active as possible, as like sharing the kind of like fumbling, uncertain confusion of actually doing work versus kind of the reflective, perfect recounting of a science discovery. I wanted it to be like science in action, a scientist in action. Um, and I don't know if it's, do you guys feel like hearing a reading? I was thinking there are some of the essays are longer and some of them are shorter. And I was thinking of reading you an essay, an entire essay. It'll take less than 5 minutes because it's pretty short. About doing science research. But what are you guys thinking? Do you want to talk about this? Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know, it's like kind of an interesting thing of like cultivating hope is like talking about the active science more hopeful than talking about like working in politics or I definitely find that like action is kind of the antidote to anxiety. And so being politically active is like, you know, can be very empowering. But okay, so I'm going to read you an essay. It's called Whatever Discomfort Finds Beauty. This is how it is at 11,000 feet of elevation. You wake up to winter, eat lunch in summer, and put on a wool hat to sleep. Cook oatmeal for the team at the picnic table. The hot coffee will stop your shivering. Just because you've been to happy hour with the other graduate student and the 2 lab staff, it doesn't mean you know them. Everything is different in the field. By the time you arrive at Lily Lake, the Colorado sun will be above the trees and you'll be shedding layers. The world is rapidly warming, even more so at altitude. It's 2005 and carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere are 380 parts per million. You arm yourself with the theory of change. The past is key to anticipating the future. Pulling cores of sediment out of Lily is like putting a finger over the top of a straw in a milkshake and pulling the straw out full of milky sweetness. You work from a wood platform strapped to 2 canoes. Push the core barrel down through the hole in the middle of the platform. That is your straw. The mud at the bottom of the lake is your milkshake. Each push starts easy, sliding through water and loose mud, and then the slight resistance of water lily roots. It is one thing to push, it is another to pull mud out. Your legs tingle in unbearable closeness with your team as you grunt and desperately give it all you have. Ignore the panic, it will come out. Remember to start low, use your legs and not your back. That everyone 10 years older has herniated discs is a warning. There is no secret club to be admitted to, and if there were, it wouldn't be worth joining. You lick your fingers as each core comes up, silt or clay or sand, evidence of times when the lake dried up, and out here was sandy shoreline. You eat salami and cookies with muddy hands. If you had a mirror, you would see the streaks of sunscreen and dried mud on your face. There are clumps of mud in your hair and on your clothing. The sun is brutal and hot in the thin air of the never summer range. No matter how sweaty you are, keep your hat on. Splash yourself at the lake. Remember, if you swim in your clothing and your bra will never dry. Ignore the fear in your colleague's voice when he shouts, "Moose!" It's bigger than you imagined, meaning you didn't know how it would make your body feel. You can't run, your boat is anchored in place. So take in the strong limbs, the reeds and water dripping from its mouth, the way the lake appears a puddle when a moose walks through. This animal, it is part of the forest, but your life is a blip, a yelp, a fleeting moment out of the thousands of years archived in cores of mud piled up on the platform behind you. When you need to go, don't wait. Don't stop drinking water. Don't ignore the tightness in your throat. Don't tell yourself you will ruin the team's groove. Ask everyone to turn around and sing God Save the Queen. Squat over the hole. The moose doesn't care. The mud doesn't care. Look at the way light filters through pine needles, the outrageous lily flowers, the zing and zap of dragonflies. God save the queen. It's historic now. There's my queen. The closer you get to the bottom, the more urgent it becomes to reach bottom. Bottom as in the land carved out by glaciers in the last ice age that became the basin for water to collect. Keep everyone talking. Pause to eat chips or chocolate, whatever is at hand. The sun is falling quickly, the penetrating eye of a beast peering through the forest. When the orange light turns the tree trunks to glowing embers, put long pants on over your shorts, pull on your long sleeve shirt, take out your headlamp. If water or mud slides down the side of the core barrel and into your sleeve, let it warm you a moment before it chills you. When the air is still, listen for the thrashing insect wings and jumping fish. This is why you are here. You insist, in your reasonable and rational way, on incessantly naming, measuring, and describing. All that just to participate, to be included, to be part of the great inhale and exhale. So, do you guys know like why you would lick sediment? There's a reference to that, the sand, silter,
You're
clay.
looking for grit.
Yeah, yeah. If it's clay, you're not going to get the grit between your teeth.
And what does that tell you? Sorry.
Right there.
So the size of the sediment grains tells you about the energy of the water. So if you like, you need more energy to have like sand or bigger grains. So when you're out in the middle of like a still basin with deeper water, you're going to have finer grains. And the thing is with the lake, so in the boundary waters, the lakes are more tectonic. They're like from the earth rifting and pulling apart. So it's a different kind of lake. But most of the lakes in Minnesota, like south of here, and this lake was in the Rocky Mountains. A lot of the Rocky Mountain lakes are basins that were left behind by the glaciers retreating, and they're basically an outcropping of the water table. And so if the water table goes down, then the lake shrinks. And so you could have like, if the lake's bigger at one point and it gets smaller, then you're going to get sand and bigger size grains out into like what in the past had been deeper water. And then if the lake gets bigger again, so you could end up having like a sand layer out in the lake that's going to tell you like, oh, that lake got smaller, you had more wave energy here, and then oh, it got bigger again. And so over time you see these changes in the size of the lakes, and you need usually more than like one lake, but you see it as a pattern regionally of like lakes they're getting deeper, they're getting bigger, they're getting smaller, and this is corresponding to the overall climate. So it was getting drier, there was less water available. You'll see it in the change in the types of plants that you have, that you're getting more drought prone plants and less of the plants that need continuous moisture. Has anybody here cored a lake?
How deep do you go?
Well, you can go pretty, so if you get, so there's kind of two questions. One is how deep of water can you go through?
Okay.
And you're adding metal rods to go deeper and deeper, and you can go pretty deep. And if you get more than like 50 feet of water, then it tends to be at the bottom. You have anoxic conditions, and you can get varve sediments, which is basically like tree rings where you're having annual layers, and you can count those layers, so you can get really good time estimates. Which is fantastic. So there's sort of like a really good thing about finding super deep lakes. And then in terms of the amount of sediment in the basin, it depends on how productive the lake is. So in Minnesota, a lake might be like 12,000 years old, and you have, I don't know, 10 meters of sediment. They're pretty productive lakes. If you go out to Colorado and you're at high elevation, you might have a lake with 2 meters of sediment for the past 12,000 years. Yeah.
Yeah, so I haven't cored a lake, but my dad cored a lot of lakes. He's a diatomist, and I'm wondering
Yeah.
if you're looking for life, or you're talking about coring way deeper, right? Or am I wrong?
So diatoms are siliceous algae, and they can be preserved. So if your dad was coring them, he's probably looking at fossil diatoms from the past.
Yeah.
Yeah. So pretty much like any body of water, even a puddle has diatoms in it. You can look at them under a microscope, and they're like kind of like spiny monsters. They look sort of like Baroque wallpaper designs. They're really exquisitely beautiful. Like it's really worth like Googling like diatoms and looking at pictures. And there's different species of diatoms, and they have a different morphology or form, so you can identify them. And some of those diatoms will live in very high pH water or very saline water, or they can survive like intermittent drying out of water, or they can't survive any of those things. So if you know what conditions each type of diatom can survive in, then you have an assemblage in the past of a set of diatoms, and those are going to be a proxy, like they're clues that are basically giving you information about like what could have the potential environmental conditions have been. Have you guys played Battleship? It's like Battleship, right? Like it's like, okay, well that diatom's there, so it couldn't have been like more saline than this, and we have this diatom here, so it couldn't have been, and you can kind of eliminate a number of things so that you get like a range of like, here's what it would have been like. I used other people's diatom data. I did similar work with pollen, fossil pollen. I looked at sediments, and then I looked at molecular fossils. So leaves, like including needle leaves, have waxes on them that can be preserved in sediments for millions of years. And I was extracting those and studying the lengths, like their chemistry, which tells you something about the types of plants they came from, and then measuring isotopes in them, which gave us more climate information.
Which isotopes?
I was looking at hydrogen and carbon. So
Okay.
they were hydrocarbon chains,
Okay,
which is like, in the book, one of the things I talk about, there's a chapter called Interviewing with the FBI. And this is like, when I was a scientist, I was doing a postdoc and I was applying for academic jobs and trying to figure out, like, how do I make a life out of this? I had a kid. I was like, I can't just like live on 2-year grants and move around. Like, I need like some stability, and I need to have health insurance. And so I was like, well, maybe I could work at the FBI, because the job that was really obvious was working in oil companies, because I was doing this like cutting edge research on hydrocarbons. So that's like, my molecular fossils are in oil companies, like
Raw material.
way for
Yeah.
characterizing wells. And it was like, I don't want to go work for an oil company. And saying that, like, there would have been it would have been very powerful to go work for an oil company and understand how those companies work. The best lobbyist that I ever met on environmental issues had worked at an oil company, and she had this depth of knowledge that you just can't get if you don't work somewhere. So like, but at the time I was like, I'm not working for an oil company. It was like, maybe I could work for the FBI doing forensics. But I didn't do that. You're gonna ask something.
Is 12,000 years your time horizon? What's that?
So glaciers, so there were like glaciers that were covering much of Minnesota, much of the Rocky Mountains, a lot of places, and they were retreating. Starting about 20,000 years ago, there was this retreat, and then there was kind of, it's like going back and forth. And about 12,000 years ago is when you start to get resolved records. But there are places that, might have a record going back further than that. But that's like sort of a rough estimate of when you're starting to get like pretty good information.
The late Darby Nelson, I don't know if I've ever run into him, he was in the legislature. He was also a cross-country skier who I competed against. And he spoke at Tuesday Group years ago. He had written a wonderful book on the Minnesota River. And this one on the love of lakes and how we love our lakes to death. But he was kind of a lay scientist and a good writer, telling stories about his times at these different places too. So you reminded me of Darby.
Oh, thank you. There's a question over here.
Yeah, you made reference in that essay to your theory of change.
Yeah.
Understanding, well, actually, if you could repeat it, that would be great.
Yeah.
Because, right, we hear variations of that when we're thinking about like social history, like understanding our past means we're all make the same mistakes. But how do you think about that in terms of like science and the long-term sort of scientific historical record you're trying?
Yeah, so I think there's like a couple things in there. So when I was writing grants for my science research, it was studying the past is a key to understanding the future. And in a very literal, practical sense, when we're making climate models to predict what's happening in the future, our way of calibrating and checking them is, can they capture the past? Can they resolve what happened in the past? And so the better we know the past, the better we can figure out whether the model is capturing it, and also to like make sure it understands that type of like climate dynamics. So that is like the kind of practical, concrete piece of it. But the thing is that the future we're headed into, like, I mean, no time period is exactly like another time period, and the order in which things happen and the boundary conditions that are there are maybe not going to be so similar to the past. And so just in this, like, if we want to understand the future climate, or like, what is the climate going to be in Ely in 2100, can we just get that from looking at the past? And there's been periods in Earth's record when things have been so warm that the Arctic was tropical. But that was a really long time ago, and our resolution of those events are generally not on like human timescales. So there's kind of a mismatch. Like lakes are really great because you can get a resolution on a human timescale of changes. Um, but it's harder with like ocean cores tend to be you're averaging out more time. Um, but it's an interesting, like, I mean, in referencing that theory of change, it's kind of like this was sort of the basis for all the work we were doing. And I came to a point that was like, we have this climate crisis. What is my role in it? I'm studying the past. I don't know how to plug that in. Like, cause there's this, um, so recently I did a book event in DC and it was during the American Geophysical Union conference, which is like 20,000 geologists. So many people working on climate and studying climate. And a lot of them came to this event and somebody asked a question and I can't remember what the question was, but I said something of like, studying the science of climate is completely different than studying the science of climate solutions. And so that was something that I was really starting to feel like the like if I can tell you in specificity the landscape history of, this area or another area in Minnesota, how much is that going to help us anticipate the future? And that there's this like science that we also need of how do we make batteries, that are going to be really efficient? Like, how do we change our system of waste? How do we create a circular economy? And those are much more like engineering science. And we're definitely not going to like get that from understanding the past better. So I think there's aspects of understanding the past is really helpful grounding information, but the future and the science of the future also demands like us to know more than that. And then that's kind of interesting because are the people who have the skills and knowledge to do that kind of future technology work, like that's, maybe they're not coming from or understanding like the what it means to be in this period of rapid change and like what that matters. So you have kind of different pools of knowledge. And sometimes it seems like the people who are most invested and interested in these climate solutions, they're like not actually coming from the science to do that, which is interesting.
You say they're not?
Yeah.
Are they coming from business trying to, because there's a chance to make money doing this?
They're coming from all different places. They're coming from business. They're coming from oil companies. My husband works in geothermal energy and he had just met folks at another geothermal company and they had just sold their company to Schlumberger, which is a oil and gas company. And he was like, well, it makes sense because they are a big multinational company. And if you're going to get this technology all over the world, you need big multinational companies. So like, are we going to be saved, by Exxon? And that's like an interesting question of like, or, what is the, like, what kind of like engineering or different kinds of technology development are you doing? And is understanding these problems something that you've been educated in to know that like, hey, like I want to solve these problems for this reason.
What do you think of our new attribution science that wants to, I guess, ascribe responsibility or donate, or I don't know the right word, to show responsibility of certain people or groups and saying that they're more responsible to do the societal changes to slow or mitigate climate change? Do you follow that attribution science at all?
I mean, I've heard things like about that or, sense of responsibility of there's like some countries, or folks in different socioeconomic groups who have who are contributing a lot more emissions. I think in reality, like telling somebody, so I have two kids, right? and they get mad at each other and they're like, you're such a jerk, you did whatever. And the other one isn't like, oh, I'm sorry, I'll take responsibility for that. Like their kind of reaction is to like push back. So I don't know that like being like, I've proved that you are 38% of the problem, so like you owe this much money. I don't know that that's gonna go somewhere. I mean, I feel like right now we're in a place of like, how do you get a critical mass of countries and policies and companies and people to be on a to like create the momentum that we are headed towards decarbonizing, and how do you get that momentum going so that people are joining in and participating not because they hold a certain set of like moral values or concerns or they were educated in natural resource management, but because it's just like the easy thing to do, because most people aren't gonna like sit down and take classes in something, or they don't have time to, or they haven't had access to. And there certainly is a thing of like, in Minnesota in 2007 we passed climate legislation almost entirely unanimous. There's one person who didn't vote for the Next Generation Energy Act that set greenhouse gas emission standards and set the first renewable energy standard. It was bipartisan. And by, you know, 2012, 2014, like climate was no longer bipartisan. And when I was working for Governor Dayton and working with the legislature, anything on climate, clean energy, environmental protection, the Democrats who were not in the metro didn't vote for it. So it's like we've been sort of losing people from the tent. And I think that like, you know, you can lay blame on people, but like if it's not going to get us towards action and change, I don't really see the point. And it seems like we need a way to make the tent bigger, and not to like push people away. But what do folks here think?
Why did that happen?
Why did which happen?
We were falling off of, like you said, outside of the metro, you were no longer.
Well, so when the Next Gen Energy Act passed, it was under Governor Pawlenty, who was a Republican. And he like initiated and put the money out for us to do our first state climate plan. It was happening in many states were doing climate plans, many states were setting climate goals. It felt like a bipartisan issue. There was national legislation that was bipartisan to have this kind of climate action. I think there was a feeling of like, how much political capital would it take to get the climate bill passed versus the healthcare, like the Affordable Care Act? And what did we need to do there? There's some like New Yorker articles that sort of break down like what was happening in these Senate offices, but it was Lindsey Graham was the Republican that was on that national legislation. There was breaking down from within the Democrats. So it's Webb from Virginia, senator. He was like, no, we should have more offshore drilling. So you kind of, like it was a really hot topic. It seemed like it was going to happen, but like people had things to lose, people had things to gain, people had power plays, and then we got Affordable Care Act, but we didn't get the Climate Act. And then the pendulum swung the other way and it became not, but I think in my experience with climate, people feel attacked. So it's like the conversation isn't like, what do you hope for in 150 years? Like, do you want there to be, birch trees in Minnesota, or, like, what will the lakes, like, will we have lakes? Like, what will it be like? Like, what kind of species will be here? Is it important that we preserve this? What will sea level be? Like, that's not the conversation. Like, that might be the conversation I think I'm having. But on the other side, it's more like you're telling me that like I can't operate my business. You're telling me that I can't operate my farm.
I can't live in Florida.
Yeah, yeah. You're like just making things really expensive, and like, why should I not do these things? And why are you making my life harder? Why are you attacking me? So I don't know. That was like my experience in politics, was seeing that like it's not that there are people who care about the environment and people who don't care about the environment. I had this very humbling experience when I went to work for Governor Dayton. The legislative session started about 3 months later, and I went and I met with all of the committee chairs and their co-chairs, and the Republicans were in power, so I was meeting with folks on the other side of the aisle. and they had very different views from me. And I was talking to somebody in the house who is very, very far to the right. And he said, "Oh, yeah, clean water. I ran on clean water. That was my campaign. Like, I care about clean water." And it was like, how is that possible? Because you don't agree with anything that I think. And, it's like a humbling thing to realize, like this person, he's not trying to gain anything by telling me that, like, he ran on clean water. Like, he cares about clean water, just he doesn't agree with the path
Okay, yeah.
that I'm like thinking of. It's like, yeah, we're gonna get to clean water, and it's not gonna be through regulation, and it's not gonna be through fines, and it's not gonna be through permits.
What would it be through then?
Good question. I mean, that's like like, did anybody here farm? Does anybody here grew up on a farm? But like, farmers are stewards of their land. They care about their land.
I've
And
lived on a farm and I'm actually designated a federal farm, even though I hardly produce enough to feed myself.
okay. But like, farmers are stewards of their land. They love their land. They don't walk outside and think like, gee, how can I like just totally pollute this landscape that I live on and own? And yet we also know that farms produce an incredible amount of pollution. They are a quarter of all of our carbon emissions. They are,
And now it's
The-
industrial agriculture rather than the little
Yeah.
farmer who I think
yeah,
really does love his land.
yeah.
The industrial agriculture wants to get the profit out of it.
Yeah, but that's like what farming looks like. So there's like a disconnect, between these things. But I think that's where, like, how do we have conversations where we start to see each other and start to like find that common ground? How do we make it that climate is not this partisan issue?
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think about, like right now, the federal government is like scrubbing out any program that has climate in it. But the thing is, like, a lot of those programs existed before. I was talking to somebody who works in the Forest Service, and she was very upset and terrified about what's going to happen. But the fact is that, like, most of what the Forest Service does, they did before they talked about climate. And it's just that has become part, it's like, okay, and this is a frame in which we're seeing this. But all these things still need to happen, whether you're talking about climate or not. Like climate, in some ways, it's everything, it's nothing. You don't need to talk about it in order to do the work that needs to happen all the time. And so I think there's a lot of ways of making progress. Yeah.
I don't understand how you don't feel attacked as a scientist by what's going on.
Oh, I feel attacked
Today.
by what's going on.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, but like here we are. We're in Ely and we're talking, and 65 people came to the Tuesday group, and we're, like thinking about this.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I feel attacked, but I don't feel hopeless.
Yeah, I don't either, but I feel attacked when I see my sister's house burned down in LA, or
Yeah.
I'm in the middle of a wildland fire. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, do folks, do you want to, I was kind of wondering if you want to talk about something from the book, or I could read something else from the book, or if you guys want to talk, or kind of like go around the room and like, yeah, Barb. Yeah.
I have a question I want to ask,
Yeah.
since we've got two geologists who know a lot about water.
Yeah.
We keep hearing about the damage that is being done by putting all the salt on the streets.
Yeah.
Is that a real scare? And do we need to do something about it?
It depends on where you live,
Okay,
and it depends on your local geology, and it depends on how much rainfall you get.
okay, right here in.
Right here, I would have to say, I don't know. I'll be perfectly honest. I know in very wet places like Tahoe, they've completely banned road salt because of its effect on the lake. So I mean, there are places where it's a critical thing. But then again, like Tahoe is an extremely sensitive environment. There are places where they throw salt on the ground and they don't care, like Maine. And, you would think that those have similar clients, they don't. They have different geology, they have different precipitation patterns, they have different sedimentation, they have different ways of catching contaminants that get into the soil, into unconsolidated sediments. So it just really depends on where you are. But it can be horribly devastating, and there are places where it doesn't really matter. I mean, if you're in the middle of the Mojave Desert out by Boron, and there's a blizzard, they'll salt the roads. They don't care because it doesn't matter in the desert.
Right.
Where there are all those evaporates just
But,
lying on
you
the
know,
ground.
A lot of it happens around here.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of lakes. And we keep hearing how sensitive they are to all of these nasty things we're doing to them. Is that one of the nasty things that we should be working on?
Yeah, you probably should ask somebody who's a real limnologist, as opposed to asking somebody who's a borehole geophysicist.
So you can measure the salinity of the lakes. You can look at the species that are sensitive to the salinity. So like the diatoms would be one, and measuring the salinity of the groundwater. So I know in the metro area, the groundwater salinity has been changing in response to the salt that is going on the streets. And it is considered to be a problem because that is the water of the future to be drunk in. And there's only like so much salt that you can take before that would not be like drinkable water. So it's like, what's like the sustainability of the situation? Like, it's okay to like salt the street today, but like if we keep doing this, at some point we're gonna get to a place. So it's kind of like, how old is the water that you're drinking? How fast does it turn over? And there's been bills for several years to try to so I mean, one of the things about all of this, and you guys probably know as much about this as me, but that like there is climate change and then there is our human actions, and these are like a mix of you know, like what the outcome. So something like the fires in LA. I have a brother who lives in Altadena whose neighborhood burned down too. And so one part of the equation is like, what are our wildfires? Why are they happening? Why are you getting these hot winds? What are the conditions that set you up for a fire? But then the other is like, what are the plants that you have here? What are the fire breaks? What's the deal with like the utility infrastructure, and are these built to, you know, be a problem or not? And so sort of the same with like the water is, what are we doing that's a problem? Like our land use is something that we have a lot of control over, but it's a problem. But one of the things is that lawsuits, so like whether you have safe roads or not is one question, but whether you get sued is another. And so this is like a thing, it's like a non-material problem that we have created that is part of this issue. And so a lot of the legislation I've seen around this is like, and it comes from New Hampshire, so not Maine, but it comes from the East Coast, where they've passed this. It's a, like, if you are a certified salt applier and you go through a training that trains you to not over salt, because if you go to Chicago, it's like there's just like salt grains everywhere, and that's a liability thing. So if somebody slips and falls and you're like, no, here's a picture, look, I put so much salt down. And so the idea is to train people to not over salt, and then they are like protected from legal action against them if somebody slips and falls. So it doesn't solve the whole problem, but it's like one way of like, where's a place that where have we created an artificial problem that we could solve? Not that it solves like the whole problem.
Seems like where it's effective too. I mean, up here, you know, if it stays cold, you don't want to melt the snow. You want to plow it away.
Yeah.
Because you don't want melting and refreezing and ice. So that's the advantage to being farther north, is that you don't melt it and have it refreeze. You don't have intermittent slush.
Yeah.
I think the road departments up here do send their people through trainings to try to learn how to use the minimal amount of salt, but where I drive, there's still tons and tons of salt.
I got one question to wrap up, which is, What are you gonna do next?
So I work, and I have 2 kids, and so that takes up a lot of like what do I
Hasn't
do
stopped you
next?
so far.
But I'm writing. I've been writing a lot of fiction,
Oh,
actually.
interesting.
Yeah, so I'm working on a fiction manuscript.
What flavor of fiction are you gonna say?
I've been working on short stories that engage a lot with science, magic, and Italy.
Okay.
Science,
Oh.
magic, and what?
Italy.
That's what I thought.
Go back to the salt thing, so, can't we be looking for alternatives?
To salt.
To salt,
Yeah.
or just alternatives in so many things, you know, and they talk about, like, the mining, and we need the copper and nickel and plating and all that. Is there anybody looking at some alternatives to that? What else? could
Yeah,
we-
MnDOT has done a number of test programs, and they have like a beet brine that they use sometimes, and yeah, there's like a range of
Cheese water.
yeah. And then there's things with like, it's not just the chemical, but like how you, so like pre-brining the streets in the metro where it's warmer
Yeah.
is helpful, and reduces how much salt you put down later. So there's kind of like best practices.
I get emails regularly, Bart, from PCA on teaching. If I wanted to take a class on safe salting.
Yeah, I
they would
gave them
probably
too.
do one by now. So yeah, I think as much as road salt is a ecological problem, we're doing okay on providing people with enough information. It's similar to the farmers where it's like we aren't really like making people do it the right way, but we're making it easier to do it the right way if they want to.
Well, it's a relief to have something crossed off the list of things I have to worry about.
Yeah.
So I think we're like nearing the end of our time.
We are.
And just kind of, is anybody like wondering about, contacting your elected officials, or like if you're looking for something to do, like if you're like, man, I filled out this thing on Hope and I don't feel hopeful, like if there's some kind of like action you want to take, just like, is anybody feeling like that? And we can help you problem solve some actions you could take. Yeah.
Something that came up on Facebook the other day that was an action to take. It's February 28th, and I guess it's, I don't know if it's a boycott, or it's a buy nothing day.
Okay.
And don't buy anything, don't buy a cup of coffee, don't buy any gas, just buy nothing. And the idea of it is if this spreads and enough people do it, and I can't even tell you who the person on side of it, you can look it up too.
Okay.
But, you said it might not sound like much, and it might sound like it could have any impact, but it can't. Enough people do it, and then there could be actions beyond that. February 28th, why not?
Cool.
Yeah, which is a pretty easy action to take. I mean,
Yeah.
just keep it
Can I
going.
add one?
Younger people, the more you can get them informed, because they're the ones that'll have to change it. You know, like schools, what can we do? Well, I'm too old. Somebody get on the school board or something like that. So there are things
Yeah.
you can do, because
Can I add one?
that is critical.
Let's
Yeah,
hear
Renee.
Renee.
Yes, there's an app called 5Calls, and it helps you call your representatives. So I'm living in Seattle right now because I don't have a way to live in northern Minnesota, but I go back to northern Minnesota and I have a family home there. So I've been putting in 55706 as my zip code so that I can call Pete Stauber about all of these things. And I get a very nice young man who takes my comments. But I hope that there are more of you who are calling Pete Stauber, because he has to know that we're not happy about all this stuff.
Call and email.
So this is an app that Renee was saying, if you couldn't hear her, it's called 5Calls. I hadn't heard of it. And it's like the number 5, so 5Calls, and it helps you contact your congressional delegates. And have folks here, has anybody here called your like congressional delegate offices?
I have. I'm gonna go to a legislative days in a month or two for soil water conservation district. I'll be advocating for forest safety related to climate change.
Yeah.
That's on the state level.
Yeah, that's great. It's great to act on the local level. I mean, my sort of interpretation of what's going on in our country is like the the intention, I'm not sure where we're actually headed because it feels very chaotic, but the intention of it is to take a lot of the power out of the federal government and leave it up to locals to determine and to manage, which is a lot of work for counties and cities and states to do. And then it means you have different things in different places. But like, if that's where we're headed, there's power in that. And there's a lot of power, whatever is happening, like your county, your city, your state has a lot of power and can do things that is not subject, like that is the point of the United States, is that like each state has a lot of its own power to do things. And so being involved at that local level might be one of the most useful things you could do.
So our group, which has met for 12, 15 years, has recently, over the last 2 years, formed a core group that is now active. And we have been working with the school to go into the Minnesota program to get solar on schools.
Cool.
We've also persuaded the Ely City Council to rejoin Minnesota's Green Step program. And they now have a green team, which has 4 of our members on it.
Cool.
So we're just starting to push along at the edges. I mean, with the green team, it's not going to be advocating for environmental things. It's going to be showing the city how they can save money
Yeah.
by using less energy.
But I think
and
that's
so on.
in order for us to address climate, we don't need to convert everybody into a climate advocate. It's okay if people are doing things because it saves them money or
Right.
because it's easier.
Right.
And it's like gonna take a lot of work by a set of people who care to make those things work for everybody else. But I don't think we're ever gonna convert everybody into climate advocates. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to what you had said before about how it was one way in 2006 and by 2012 it had totally flipped. And like, from what I understand, we don't need to convert anyone, right? Like 70% of people are worried about climate change and everybody likes saving money. And yet we're still getting our butts kicked right now. And it just seems so weird that the Minnesota legislature would go from 100% just sort of common sense, let's save some money and have less pollution, to being like 50% in favor of those things now, sometimes less than 50%. And obviously the federal government gone 100% in the opposite direction for now. But like, it's just so troubling that the majority of people already are on the right side of this, but their representatives are totally disconnected from that. And I don't know, I mean, you were the one who said that you had worked in the data administration, and I just wonder if I don't want you to give me hope on that. I know it's a problem, but I just wonder if you have any thoughts on it. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
like why Pete Stauber can get 50 earnest calls a day and just ignore them, like,
Yeah.
it's just, it wears a person down.
Yeah. I mean, he can get elected without you.
Yeah.
So like, it might be in one survey that 70% of people see this as a problem, but when it comes to voting, people aren't voting for him to do that. So when I worked for Dayton and I was overseeing implementation of a regulation on farmers called the buffer law. And everybody knows that farms are causing pollution that is a problem. Like nobody disagrees on that. And everybody wants clean water. But that doesn't mean that anybody wants a regulation and that they think people in St. Paul know better than them what they should be doing on their farm. And I think the thing that's really, really important to note is who outside of the metro in the legislature is voting for anything that has to do with climate or the environment. And you have this real geographic divide, and it's pretty easy if you live in the metro to vote for things about land management and farm management and business management when that's not what you do. Like it's like no skin off my back if we regulate farmers because I don't work on a farm. So I think there's like a real there's a real problem there that you've got the majority of the population with a certain perspective and a lack of kind of empathy or understanding of like the majority of the land. And the way that politics are set up, like land votes in Minnesota, But like, if we don't have representation in the Minnesota State Capitol from outside the metro wanting things to happen on the environment, like, we're pretty limited in how this is gonna work. And I think it's that people, again, it's not that they don't think climate is important or they don't care about the environment, it's that they feel attacked. And so it's like, how do we do things in a way that people don't feel attacked? And like, you take someone out of the metro who's voting for pro climate representatives, and they have no idea why this person feels attacked. I mean, I used to, so like in the water world, not climate, I would talk to folks in the environmental advocacy community, and they would say, like, everything I do is with farmers. I work with farmers on everything. You know, everything I'm telling you today has been vetted by farmers. And then they would say, you know, farmers are the problem. And they would say that in public meetings. And it was like, you're not getting it, you know? So there's like a disconnect. Everybody's got some kind of disconnect that like is not leading us towards the unanimous vote we had in 2007 for climate legislation.
It's so interesting to me, like when you're talking farmers about the buffer zones, if you were in conversation with them long enough and just listened to their story, was there something else that was foremost in their mind that was affecting their life? Could have been something totally other than the buffer zone.
Yeah,
thing.
going bankrupt and suicide rates. Suicide
Yeah.
rates were really high. And you know, when you talk to folks at like farm organizations and they're telling you about the calls that they're getting from people, it's like people's finances, it's the legacy of their farm, what you do with the land,
Yeah.
it's things they have no control over with like prices and markets, and it's like mental health issues that they don't have access to, like mental health help, they don't have access to daycare, you know, their community is not thriving. So yeah, like those are the big concerns.
When my wife and I traveled last November down to North Carolina from here, we had to take a detour at one point, and we stopped in a small restaurant and we overheard a conversation between two farmers. And this was a town smaller than Ely. Their big concern was they couldn't figure out how to, there was nothing in the town for their kids to do, and the kids didn't want to farm. So they were going to lose their farm, and they really wanted the kids to stay close. And I think there are some old families in this town who hold that same value about wanting their children to stay in the community and have a way to make a living and be close to that. So that was kind of what I heard was a common thread between here and there, but their big deal was about there's nothing for the kids to do in this community and stay close, and they don't want to farm.
There are a lot of things the government hopes to do, work with farmers about climate change. A lot of it has to do with farming behaviors that would sequester carbon. And that's all done, as far as I know, on a voluntary basis and a method that will help the farmer or give them some kind of payment for their activities. And it's the same thing that I've heard about the buffer financing. I don't know exactly much about the buffer laws, but what I've heard about buffer financing is that that's all done on a voluntary basis where the government is helping do stream restoration on private properties. And it's the government who's initiating or paying for it so that the private property owners are happy with what the government's doing.
But then there's also a lot of people who just don't want to do a government program, and they don't, there's a lot of restrictions. Like if you do conservation reserve program, there's a number of restrictions. And so then it's like somebody in DC telling you what to do on your land, and some of it doesn't make sense. Like there's a group, the Climate Land Leaders, you guys know them? They started in 2020. Teresa, the executive director, ran Practical Farmers of Iowa for a long time before that, which is a really cool group in Iowa. And it's farmers who want to do something about climate and generally don't know what to do. And they don't they don't actually have that great of guidance. And so this is like a peer-to-peer learning program. And some of it, they have like a soil scientist who comes out, they look at the carbon in their soil, they're changing their practices, they're learning about the flow of water, what they can do to help sequester carbon and prevent emissions from their farm, and then measuring the carbon over time to see how they're improving it. But one of the big things they spend their time doing is trying to figure out government programs and then sharing with others, like, okay, I tried this government program that's supposed to help me, and this is why it sucked, or this is why it was great, or this is why it was really hard to get enrolled. But that, yeah, the government, so there's like, it's not like, it's not like there's this like perfect system and people are just not opting into it. It's like we have an imperfect system and people feel attacked and then they try to interact and then they're pissed about something. And so there's lots of room for improvement.
Okay, guys. I
Yeah,
think
we should probably,
we
so
should,
will you please,
Anna, and maybe have another whole session
put
on
your-
farming.
put your jar in, your piece of paper in the jar, in the hope jar. If you would like, if anybody, if you weren't at the thing this morning, I have postcards of the book. If anybody has a book that you want signed, please give me back your pen because I'll keep using them. If anybody wasn't there this morning and wants to do a book plate, I'd love for you to do one.
Paragus has your books. I
And
hope.
Paragus
Yeah,
has my
okay.
books.
What was that climate
Yeah.
group again?
The Climate Land Leaders,
Climate land.
they're really cool. Teresa is like, so.
You put it in a certain way to live, right?
However, you just jam it in there. However, I don't know, it says something about your relationship to Hope, how you get it in the jar. Renee, thank you for,
Yes, but a lot of those bills now are being taken away. So just today and yesterday and last week. The, you know, the ones that aren't perfect, they're going to go entirely.
Thank you for coming.
yeah.